Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for dialing in, and thank you to our guests, Josh and Christine, who are here on the call with us. Really excited to have them share a little bit about their work in the People and Artificial Intelligence department here at Google. Josh has actually left Google, but has joined us from the New York office in Google. So you can see a little bit of the fun props that we have in our office behind him. Wave, Josh.
Hi.
And yeah, he's since moved off to be a principal design manager at Microsoft, and he's focusing on bringing the intersection of product design ethics and artificial intelligence, which is an extremely important and critical component to the next frontier of technology. And then Christine Kohlhepp, wave for the camera. She's a user experience researcher, also currently on the Google AI team, and she's worked with Josh for the past 4 years on a number of different projects. And I'm extremely excited to have them here as guests to share a little bit about the work that they've done. So without further ado, I'll pass the mic over to Josh.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Melissa. Bittersweet and fun to be here. Also great to be using Hangouts again, because I do love Hangouts. So Christine and I are going to talk today in both kind of broad strokes, but also in kind of zooming into some case studies on what we have started to call the UX of AI. And we're going to talk about some of, I would say, some of the most important realizations, and in many ways kind of like coming back to normal or normalcy that we've experienced over the last 4 or so years of working in the space of machine intelligence and product design, and trying to actually track that whole data lifecycle to be the most human-centered it can be. So I'm going to specifically talk through kind of a use case or a case study for Google Clips, and then Christine really from kind of the design aspect. And Christine is going to open it up and expand across a broader range of products that our team has worked on, and really speak from that user experience researcher perspective. So let's get right to it. So Clips, for those that aren't aware, is this little camera. Yeah, books for size, books for scale. And the really the unique aspect of this little camera is that it's powered by a bunch of on-device machine learning models. It has no internet connection. The only way that content can get from this camera onto anything else is that it spins up a little Wi-Fi network, and then your phone essentially acts as like the viewfinder. And you can stream in content and decide what it is that you like and what you want to keep. And these are the types of kind of representative examples of the content that you get out of this camera. We say it's machine learning powered because what it's trying to do is pay attention to these little fleeting moments of life. The moments where something candid or genuine happens, and you kind of have that feeling like, oh, I wish I could have captured it in time. And we started down this path. That's me on the left, by the way, with my younger son doing like the thing he loves more than anything in the world, which is just playing basketball endlessly. And I clipped the camera. It has a little clip attachment onto a basketball hoop. And it's like, I can then actually pause and find the perfect frame that I might want, and almost like be in 2 places at once. You know, it's like I can get the photo that I could have never gotten otherwise, and I can be fully attending to just being there with my goofy little kids. More photos and videos of my kids to come. And then this notion of offline or on-deviceness. Our team at Google, I would say, was really rooted in the belief that people need to be owners and authors of their own data. For us to think that there should just be this, seamless path from the real world into the data center, I think just kind of left something missing for many of us, where you want that chance to be kind of the curator, especially in a context where you're kind of augmenting your attention, you're augmenting your memory, or kind of your ability to pay attention to the scene around you with this camera. The photos it takes and the little moments it captures, the first time you really see them is not through the viewfinder looking through a camera like normal. It's when you're reviewing them. So for that reason, we came up with this concept we call the airlock, which is kind of doing that process of streaming the content from the device onto your phone. And then whatever you want, you can save over to photos. And we'll come back to that in a little bit. But the most important thing that we realized in this journey is that while this is an immense new technology in AI and machine learning, more specifically, it doesn't mean we have to reinvent who we are as human-centered practitioners. If anything, it's more important than ever that we find the right balance between what technology is capable of and what actually addresses real human needs. Because if you don't know what you're building towards, now with this new amazing tech capability, you're actually going to just build a more powerful system that might actually end up causing some harm, or at the very least, not being very useful. So our work is still crucial, right? This isn't reinventing the wheel. We have to do this work of finding the needs. And we're going to talk about what that means in practice, and then Christine's really gonna dive deeper on some of these things. We have to do this work to guide the intelligence. Again, sometimes there's a pedestalization of AI that it knows better, and we'll talk through kind of what that means to be better guides and better sort of advocates for our users with this new medium. And we have to do this work of building trust. And really, actually, we're going to zoom in on what that means in practice. Trust is a little more complicated now that there's kind of these more these additional layers of probabilistic decisions rather than where we've played in the past, where it's been more deterministic. So starting with the human needs. Okay, so we had some signal, and some of us, if you're a parent like I am, might have had this moment where you're like looking through your photo gallery, and you're like, oh my God, that's a lot of photos of my kid. Parents, just the number of photos they take skyrockets as soon as they become a parent. And we did a bunch of foundational research, and Christine's going to talk a bit about this as well, to really get into the heart of like why people are starting to more and more live behind their cameras. The year that we started working on Clips, people were predicted to take 1 trillion digital photos. And the reality is, a lot of them end up like this, kind of repetitive, and maybe you're not actually going to go review all these things. You end up with photo galleries full of content. Why do we do it? Well, we live in this really challenging intersection of the new capability to effectively capture everything that's going on, which really heightens this fear of missing out. This need to be present, and the fear that time is just rushing past. And again, as a new parent, so frequently the experience is like, everything is new, everything is amazing, I can't let it go, and so you end up doing a bit of what my wife did, or is doing in this shot on the left. She's on a field trip with my older son, and she's doing the thing. Actually, they're both doing the thing, right? She's like, I have to remember this. This is an important moment. We're at a pumpkin patch. Everyone needs to know. And he's doing the thing of responding to the social signal. We're gonna have a camera coming out, and now his job is to pose. His job is to act for the camera. He learned that so fast. And on the right was something that really has always stuck with me. This came from some test footage that we captured in the early days of designing for Clips, where we took cameras home and we just kind of set it up and a few of us tried to figure out, like, what is memorable? What does it mean to capture something kind of autonomously, to extend our memory, to extend our awareness? And so I set down a camera and I was just playing with my kids. And my younger son was probably about just a few months old at this point. And And I was looking back at the footage later because at one point I just forgotten the camera was there, and my younger son ran and he fell. And for the first time in the life of this new person in our house, my older son rushed over and expressed honest, genuine compassion and care. Prior to that, he'd just been like, "There's a new thing in the house, and it's like stealing hugs and food from me. I don't like this." So this was a stark change, and I remember just looking back through the footage, and I started kind of curating out what were memorable, and this just dropped my jaw. It felt like I was teleporting, like I was in two places, and my memory, grew. Some more examples of me being goofy with my kids. This is just like set the camera down, go play with my kid at the park, grab a good moment, grab a good frame. These are just, they opened us up to some interesting tech capabilities aligned with human needs, right? And so that was a really wonderful discovery process where we started with the research and the tech capability. It's not either, it had to be a both. But so once we had some signal that we had a thing people actually wanted and could be used, I think the real deep effortful work began, because this is a mostly to scale diagram of my experience as a UXer starting to work with like research scientists and AI specialists. I just felt like I walked into a room of like turbo geniuses, and I had no idea what I was doing, and that I didn't even know how to ask questions or provide thoughtful assistance. And so it was a challenging process of kind of like unbuilding, like what are the things of my discipline that still apply? How much do I have to go over into this other world and become knowledgeable? But we've been here before. Every sort of new tech wave has always compelled us to have to find that right balance, right? Whether it's web design or game design or industrial design, or architecture, or mobile design, we have to know about things like latency and things like touch target sizes and things like W3C specs. And it's like the list goes on. We can't do our job unless we understand feasibility and constraints. So kind of with that in mind, it was like, okay, I think I know enough, after I felt like a moron for long enough. I think I know enough, and flip back around to really kind of taking open or pulling open that drawer of, if I can frame this more from a human-centered perspective rather than trying to describe model architecture or the way that AI should function, let's go back to this question. Because if we want to train a model, machine learning only works when there is agreement about what good looks like. That's kind of it's a complex, crazy world. You'll see neural network diagrams that make your head hurt, but really at its heart, it's that there are representative examples of what good could look like, that you leave it up to this rather complex connections or set of connections around letting an algorithm decide or figure out where there are patterns in those examples, and then learn to make predictions for new information. So kind of like early childhood education, you just like try to be consistent, show some examples. Over time, the model develops some hunches about what patterns it saw in those examples, and then it learns to make prediction, right? Same way we teach kids how to read. Show them consistent examples of phonetic arrangements, allow them to develop a hunch and an instinct about where and how they pronounce, and then show them words they haven't seen before. So if you do that wrong, it's just a mess. It's just muddy. And in our case, when we're like, yeah, we want to train models on memorableness, well, we go back to our ground truth here with people's photo galleries that they take tons of photos of and then don't go back and look at and don't really curate. So how do we know what is memorable if the people who took the photos in the first place rarely actually end up returning to them? So this was the start of a program we called human-centered machine learning, which really tried to kind of turn on its head, not to anthropomorphize technology, but to really empower the right kind of language to describe tech capability. So that starts with this fundamental question of, if we actually think we were going to try to develop like a curricula or a syllabus to teach someone to be an expert about this, some very focused part of it, what would we do? What would we actually describe about a human expert that could do this thing? And again, not to put human characteristics on the AI, but to give us a starting point for the types of consistency and representativeness that will help us teach an algorithm to develop a good set of hunches. So our starting point for this, kind of racked our brain, was wedding photographers. We're like, all right, well, it's people who they join you on an important day. You kind of get to describe what it is that you're on the lookout for, and they return back with a bunch of stuff for you to review. And so that was interesting. That got us somewhere. We were lucky. We hired not wedding photographers, but the kind of funny Craigslist, post kind of thing that we ended up with. Not actually Craigslist. Were three amazing human beings who we started calling expert curators. They were a documentary filmmaker, a fine arts photographer, and a photojournalist. And so the group of us got to work of trying to build kind of a pattern language of what memorableness looked like. Again, more opportunity to show goofy photos and images of my family. Top left, younger son learning about the nuances of a twisty straw. Just, it gets better every time I watch it. Dance parties, big thing in our house. The right side was actually one of the first times my older son let me let go of the back of his bike and ran. Stuff like that was like, okay, these are moments where actually having this camera that was untethered from a viewfinder were really powerful. But oh man, if we try to actually describe what's important about these, it gets really like romanticized really quickly, really nuanced. And so that's challenging, because we humans have a remarkable ability with a relatively small example set to develop a good common sense about things. We also have a lot of time and experience to draw from. The last thing we want to do, again, to that earlier point about pedestalization, is to think this thing, this AI, which isn't a thing, it's just a series of small little models, this thing is so smart, it'll figure it out. And that is patently false. We are the ones that have the common sense, and we are the ones that ask the best questions. What machine learning is uniquely suited for is finding patterns and returning some options back to us. So, okay, we realigned and we distilled it, and we said, let's get crisp. Let's not try to, solve the answer for what memorableness is. Let's start to tease this out into the more specific predictions that we need to get trained into this model. And more to the point, a lot of those things, a lot of that agreement that we talked about, human beings need to find agreement, and that's how you train good models. The most agreement space is in the stuff that you can confidently ignore. There's a very small window where people agree, like, that's amazing, that's memorable. But there's a big agreement space about what's pretty much fine to throw into the recycling bin. It looks like stuff like this. We had a camera that, you twisted open and closed. Turns out there were a lot of hands that it was seeing by itself, hands in the way. People were clipping it to their clothing. They were holding it, putting on a backpack, whatever it might be. So it's moving all around. It's getting obscured. No one wants this stuff, obviously. But that common sense does not come stock with machine learning. It's just, that's not how it works. Again, we are the creators of the curricula. We are not the consumers of some superintelligence. So we trained a model, this is real, on what hands look like when they're close to the camera. And we trained a model on what it looks like when the camera's in a purse or a backpack. And so we can just ignore those things. Continuity is another critical one. We're good at picking this stuff up. Sometimes it's hard to come up with labels for it. But the shot on the right, there's about 45 distinct frames in this little capture. Really, right about 3/4 of the way through, when his face comes into the sunlight and he can be seen, yeah, maybe there's a shot there. And maybe there's kind of something interesting about the shadow, but it's kind of all over the place. And if you try to ask somebody what is the message here, you have to find 1 or 2 frames. Whereas on the left side, he's in the frame the whole time, and he's central in the frame. It's a much better example. So it's remembering that consistency, the importance of consistency when you're trying to teach these fundamental concepts like continuity are incredibly important. So we really biased for the left side stuff and just like ignored. We didn't teach the models if a large number of frames in a clip were just like not great. Redundancy and diversity was another really fascinating one. And diversity is so critical across a broad spectrum of types of diversity. And we chose 3 in particular to train models around. This is one I put the camera on top of a bookshelf. I was looking down, watching the kids play and build. And, there could be lots of these photos that look very similar. That same wood grain, the same kind of color of their shirts. What I really needed is kind of just like a sampling from this. I don't need a ton, even though it's people that I know and care about and love, and they're doing something interesting. I only need a small handful. So what we said is 3 types of diversity. One, and what's being represented here, are time. So the more time that goes on, the more distance between a captured moment, the more important we think that should be, right? The longer the camera goes without capturing something, the lower the threshold kind of becomes for what interestingness looks like. The second is visual. So this is literally like thinking about the colors. Like when colors are really, really similar, we can pay less attention, right? Because we want to hook into those moments of candidness or of uniqueness. So time passes, that's a good signal that there's probably something new that's happening. Visual dissimilarity, visual heterogeneousness, and diversity. And then the last one is people. So being able to cover a broad range of people, right? It's a different story if it's like you're in a small group of people. You might want to get multiple captures of their faces, whereas if you're with like a ton of people, maybe one of each person is fine. So thinking about what it means really to end up with that photo roll of like good coverage from a situation really varies a lot. But there's a couple things that common sense can guide us really nicely. And then finally, familiarity, again, just kind of closing out that last point, we specifically trained a model around familiarity itself, which is, it's really weird. It would be really weird if a random person showed up in your photo roll if you were to take the photo, right? That's just strange. It's a strange social signal. It's also just like a trust breaker. And so we train models on what people that people you spend a lot of time with, look like, so that it can learn to recognize and become familiar with them, so that you don't end up in those situations where, again, contrary to common sense, you end up with kind of a random person. And then finally, again, our work is still critically important when it comes to actually closing that loop so that people feel confident in using technology. And this is actually where I'll kind of zoom in on that point and say it's much more important to think about this as self-efficacy. People need to feel confident in the work that they're doing, like why I'm using this technology, more so than just trust in the technology. And this kind of leads to our second big sort of human-centered machine learning fundamental, which is machine learning is unique in that it can't be bug-free. We use it as a technology specifically because its job is to make a prediction that's fuzzy. Its job is to have a hunch, to have a probability that something will be relevant, useful, whatever. And so as long as we take with us those kind of outmoded, or I would say more kind of analog oriented models around deterministic capabilities, where it's like you can have a bug-free system as long as it doesn't do the following articulated things. Machine learning isn't like that. You got to leave room for actually the interesting serendipity that it introduces. And that really means human control, right? If the model's going to guaranteed get it wrong, then how do you empower people to help who know what right looks like? So a couple specific things just to wrap up, and then I'll pass the baton to Christine. We built in a manual capture button. There were some early ideas early on, and our colleague Gabe Clapper recently wrote about this on Google Design. There were some early ideas about just like the camera should do everything automatically. But again, it turns out that the ability to develop a robust mental model is not just blind trust, it is acclimating to these capabilities. So we introduced things like letting people set the capture rate frequency. Do I want a lot of stuff and have to curate, or fewer things and trust that and be okay with that it's going to miss some stuff? Do I want control about when I specifically want to capture something? And when you're reviewing, it's your job. You get to look through these clips, you can look through them, and you can save the ones you want and ignore the rest. Again, it's your decision about which ones in specific, because you are the best judge of your own memory space. And then there, you can always go one layer deeper if you want. You can grab the whole clip, or you can zoom in and say, I want this specific frame. I want to crop it this way. I want to actually have this specific segment of the clip of the moving imagery. Not a must-have, but allow people to have those ingress points into depth of curation. And then finally, when we do onboarding, it's really getting away from this notion of like intelligence and the power of the product, but really just returning to the familiar and like treating this like a camera and describing the features and the capabilities, not the smartness, not the intelligence, but the capabilities. Because AI is just a term we use when we don't know what something does. As soon as we know what it does, we just call it a product and we name it. And that's really the direction that we found ourselves going more and more towards. So with that, I'll just close with one last kind of fundamental, which is, again, so frequently we think that with enough examples, machine learning models can perfectly find the answers for us. But really, the unique opportunity here is not to find that needle in the haystack for people, because that takes away their agency. And it also gets it wrong. And when it gets it wrong, it's a trust breaker. But instead, helping people understand how and why it cleared away the hay and allowing them clearer access to find the needle for themselves, that pays much bigger dividends and results in much more overall satisfaction with the technology and the types of product opportunities that we're building towards. So Christine now is gonna run this from more the user research perspective. I'm gonna end screen sharing and hand it off to her. She's gonna talk through, in addition to Clips, a few other products that she's worked on. Stop screen sharing somewhere. That she's worked on that really kind of bring more to light some of the pragmatic opportunities here from a user research perspective, of how to go beyond, again, just the tech capabilities. So Christine, take it away.
All right. Josh. And Josh, would you mind muting? I just hear a little bit of an echo. Great. So today I'm going to talk a little bit more about the research side of things to give you a different perspective on what Josh was talking through. And I'll draw parallels to some of the points that he was making earlier in the presentation. So in my section, I'll cover how we can use research to discover unique opportunities for machine learning to address needs, use research to guide the intelligence, and also to use research to communicate for trust and understanding. So first, we'll start by talking about discovering unique opportunities for machine learning to address needs. So it's our job as UXers pretty much all the time to find the human needs we should address with our products. But I found that sometimes you have to take a slightly different approach when you're working on machine learning projects. Since machine learning is a cutting-edge field, machine learning teams are often built around specific types of machine learning based on the specialties of the research scientists and the engineers on those teams. So for example, your team might specialize in computer vision or natural language processing. And for that reason, as a UXer working on a machine learning project, I often can't start by asking myself, what is the best thing that we can do to meet this specific human need? Instead, I have to ask myself, what needs are the machine learning capabilities that my team is developing best suited to address? Where are there unique opportunities for this type of machine learning to help people and really add value to their lives? To do this, I found it helpful to follow a process that looks something like this. First, I'll work with my engineers and research scientists to understand the technology that they're working on and the technologies and the capabilities that technology will enable in the time frame that we're designing for. Then we move on to research and design exercises to explore what needs those capabilities might address and how those capabilities should be translated into a feature or product that meets those needs. And then finally, what are the considerations we should be keeping in mind while we're designing these features and products? And there's a lot of great ways to do this, but one of the ways that I found to be very beneficial is to augment our internal discussions with co-creation research with our users. I like to think of co-creation as a way to add user-inspired ideas into the brainstorming funnel. It's a great opportunity to make sure you're thinking broadly enough and aren't missing valuable potential features. And it's also an opportunity for your team to directly interact with your potential users and thus rapidly build empathy with them, all while uncovering feature ideas, user needs, and design considerations. So here's an example of a study flow, what that might look like. First, I like to start by having participants reflect on their lives, their goals, and their needs. And I might have them do this ahead of time in something like a diary study, or it might be one of the first activities of the session when we kick off. Then I introduce a series of activities that help participants explore the capabilities my team can provide in the context of their lives, thinking about how it might meet their needs. And participants are often at this point split into groups of maybe 3 to 4 people, and the small groups are facilitated by team members, so they have shared ownership of the conversation and can ask a lot of follow-up questions that would get valuable feedback for our team. After they've gone really broad and think about all the ways these capabilities could benefit them, I like asking participants to narrow down onto one idea and create an artifact that represents it. And this could be a poster, it could be a physical prototype, it could be a skit. It depends on what we're investigating, but the main goal here is to have them think deeper about the concept so that they can articulate to us what they want and, most importantly, why. Then I'll have them share out what they made and, importantly, why, so that we can, one, capture it so that we can analyze it later. And then this is also a great way to kick off group discussions so that you can then have your participants react to each other's ideas so you can understand what you should and shouldn't do when designing these types of products. I think that my favorite thing about this type of study is that you're able to take your participants on a journey that helps them think deeply about a topic that they might not otherwise have thought about. So the feedback that they're able to give you at the end of the study after going on this journey is much deeper than what you might have gotten if you just started at a surface level discussion and only talked about it briefly. A few things to keep in mind here. First, it's really important to keep it human. And this isn't actually just for the co-creation exercises, it's really for any researcher doing in this space. But even though we're trying to find ways to apply this technology, the study should really focus on the participants and their needs. And we should make sure that we're phrasing the questions and activities in a human and familiar way that they can understand and relate to, rather than being really centered around the technology. So rather than asking participants, what computer vision features would you want on your phone? I might ask them something like, what would you want your phone to do for you if it could see and understand the world around you? How might that help you? Your participants don't really care that it's machine learning delivering the functionality in the background, so don't focus on that. Often when I'm doing these studies, I rarely mention artificial intelligence or machine learning at all. I really just focus on the different abilities and how they might augment our users and help them in their lives. It's also worth noting that for these types of workshops, findings are directional. So you're probably not going to find that perfect idea coming right out of it. But through digging through the whys and the hows of their creations, you can really get to some meaningful underlying needs and uncover tons of valuable design considerations. As an example, 2 years ago, our team was exploring what machine learning driven features we might develop for smartphones. And, this is pretty broad area. There's a lot that can be done. And we wanted to make sure that we were really delivering something meaningful to our users. So to dig into this question, I ran a co-creation study where I led a diverse group of smartphone users through activities to reflect on their daily lives and goals, and then how technology could give them superpowers to reach those goals. Then I asked them to design phones that would give them those superpowers and create a poster that represented their idea, which we then discussed as a group. And these discussions were attended by team members, including designers, engineers, PMs, and other researchers. And by having them stationed at these tables, we really were able to have them build share ownership of the findings, which over 2 years later still means that this research really has legs. This work uncovered many needs and feature ideas that both my team and other teams at Google were well suited to address. And one thing that we found was that people wanted their phone cameras to help them understand and learn about the world around them. And so we were able to use findings from the study to help influence the development of what is known today as Google Lens, which is a feature that allows you to learn about the world through your camera on your Pixel. So in the next section, I'm going to focus on how we can use research to guide the development of the intelligence. And so for Google Clips, UX design and research work super closely together, and also with engineering to figure out how to structure our product's intelligence and then test those ideas with potential users. There are a few ways to use UX research to guide the development of your product's intelligence. First, it's important to use research to define success and evaluate how your product's progressing towards that success. So through research, we can define from a user's perspective what the ideal outcome of the product is, and thus how the intelligence should behave. Once that's defined, we can test and iterate on the model to make sure that we're actually on the path towards that success. And then it's also important to use research as a way to determine how the product might fail and how the system should handle those situations. Often, though, it's going to be a long time before the intelligence of your product is fully built and ready to test. And you don't want to wait that long to get user feedback on how it should behave. So what do you do in that case? Our team has found it really valuable to use Wizard of Oz prototyping. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this. It's definitely not limited to just machine learning technologies. But we found it very helpful to use people and existing technology behind the scenes to model the behavior of the intelligence used in our products. We can then use this wizardry to create an experience similar to our end product, which allows us to get feedback on the product experience, including the behavior of the intelligence. We found this especially valuable when we're using participants' own content in the study. Clips building on some of the information Josh was sharing earlier. We really wanted to test the frameworks our expert curators and designers were creating to guide model development. So Josh mentioned that they were thinking through, what it means to select this content and what rules should be used to determine whether a moment was worth keeping. We wanted to put those ideas to test on real content to see what users thought. And it was important for us here to test using users on content so that they'd actually be invested in the content and we'd be able to assess if we'd met their needs and expectations. It just wouldn't be the same if we showed them footage from a stranger and then asked them if they were satisfied and if we accurately captured the moment that they recorded. So we asked our participants to wear or place the camera like they would if they were using Google Clips to capture in real life. And at this point, we didn't have Google Clips or even Google Clips prototypes, so we were using existing cameras. And we asked them to record video of the event. And then after they were capturing, so we could process the footage. Our expert curators then reviewed the video and selected what moments to keep based on the rules that they were developing to shape the models. They then converted the content to the format that Clips would deliver to our users ultimately, so kind of going from video to the short clips that they might see in the Google Clips app. Once the output was ready, we showed users the content as if Clips had created it for them and captured their feedback on a variety of factors, including how well the curated content represented the event, whether or not any key moments or people were missing, photo quality, and other aspects that we were interested in. And through this research, we were able to dig in and understand important questions like what makes a moment worth capturing? What makes a photo good versus bad? And how do you accurately capture the essence of an event? So kind of thinking about those questions, then dialing it down to kind of understanding that we could use to shape our models. We repeated this process throughout the development of the Clips, and this enabled us to refine our design recommendations and then eventually test our models themselves as we move towards having a prototype that could execute on our end-to-end experience. It's also worth noting that beyond understanding success and failure, there are also a lot of exciting opportunities for UX to impact how data is collected, trained, and evaluated when building the intelligence of your product. So this photo is an example from Google's crowdsourced tool, which is asking you whether or not this photo contains a lake. So is lake an appropriate label for this image? And thinking about this, the intelligence used in your products is built using data sets that are likely labeled by people who are given specific tasks and instructions, and then they're evaluated using certain criteria. So these are all important points to think about as a UXer. What data sets are being used? Where did they come from and what do they represent? How are the data being labeled and are those the right labels to be using for your product? And what criteria are you using to evaluate how the models are performing? Are you taking end users' experience into account, or are you evaluating the model on its own, apart from how it exists in your product? On CLIPS, we were able to contribute to this process in many ways, including through establishing a data collection and labeling program. And finally, we should use research to help communicate our products for trust and understanding. Communication is key for any product, but it's especially important and difficult in the case of machine learning, because machine learning is technical and it works a little differently than the other products that we're used to. So it can be hard to describe and understand. And then when users don't understand the product, they might make faulty mental models that interfere with their relationships with them. Machine learning also requires the use of personal data, which is a sensitive topic in today's day of data collection. So trust is really important to build. This is an image showing the components of an AI kit that allows you to build your own projects that run on-device machine learning. And so I worked on this project and in many of the other machine learning-based projects that I've worked on. I often find my team asking questions like, how do we explain our products in a way that's easy to understand while allowing users to form the proper mental models to engage with it? How do we explain the intelligence and what it's doing in a way that's not scary or creepy? And how do we message our products so that users trust we have their best interests in mind? So to test product messaging, our team runs studies using a variety of media, from mock product pages to copy on prototype screens, to packaging, to even retail displays and more. Through these media, we try to recreate the different ways in which a user might first learn about our products, and then carefully craft statements to test out the different ways we can explain them. Participants think aloud as they learn about the products through these media, and then we ask them what questions and concerns they have, in addition to other measures of their understanding and interest. This allows us to see what language works or doesn't work, where we need to explain more or maybe less, and where we excite users versus lose them. So now I'll share an example from developing Pixel 2's Now Playing feature. When music's playing nearby, your Pixel shows the song title and artist on your lock screen so that you know what's playing. It does all of this using on-device machine learning, so the feature never records what it hears or sends any information to Google. From early stage research, we understood that while people were excited about the idea of this feature, they had some concerns about their privacy, battery life, and data usage based on the perception that their phone was listening all of the time. So we knew that we needed to do a really good job communicating the feature's on-device nature and what that meant for our users to address those concerns. So to test how to best explain this feature, we created a mock product page for the feature, as well as mock setup and settings screens to simulate the different ways our users might first learn about the feature. Over a few studies, we tested different ways of explaining this feature, how it worked, and especially that it was running on device. Here's an example of one of the mock product pages that we used. And we found after testing this page that users still had questions about how it worked, like, how does it know what songs I like? And how does the feature know how to work while offline? We also learned that saying it was private and worked offline wasn't enough to address users' privacy concerns, so we had to say more in that area. Based on this feedback, we iterated on our product messaging, which translated to the copy used in our setup and setting screens, how it was communicated on websites, and even how it was announced at the Pixel 2 event and how Google explained it to the press. And notice in the copy on the left that there's no mention of machine learning or AI. We're just focused on the feature and what it does for the user. As a result of this work, we were able to effectively communicate the on-device machine learning story of our product, which was reflected in how the media and our users talked about our feature, which you can see on the quote on the right. Ultimately, Now Playing was received with enthusiasm from our users and continues to be a popular feature, so we felt that this type of research was really worthwhile in building this trust. So to wrap things up, while machine learning is a new type of technology that raises new considerations for designing and researching products, that doesn't mean that the standard rules of human-centered design don't apply. We still need to make sure that our products address real human needs so that they're adding value to society. We should design our products in a way that upholds our values. And we should think about how we can empower and augment people rather than asking them to conform to the technologies that we're developing. And we hope that you feel empowered as UXers to use the skills that you have to bring a human-centered lens to the development of these products. And also just embrace the new exciting opportunities to apply your skills to this space. So with that, thank you, and we'll open it up to questions.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for sharing your research and for sharing some of the projects that you've worked on over the past 4 years. It's generated an interesting conversation on the chat. And so I want to surface a couple of the questions that have come from over there. And then I also have a couple of questions myself. But for those of you who are on the Hangout, feel free to chime in a silent moment and just unmute yourself, and you can ask your questions live. But one of the interesting pieces when you get into advanced technologies is the excitement around the technology itself will sometimes lead you to explore the technology for technology's sake and forget about the user. So thinking a little bit more tangibly about what it is that you could do to avoid jumping into that pit hole. What questions should you be asking yourself to try to expose some of your biases? For example, thinking about the user first rather than thinking about what AI can do for you. That was a really good point. But what are some tangible things that developers and product teams can do to avoid that and to take a moment and think human first?
Sure. Do you want to go first, Josh?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. Sometimes this comes from the perspective of like, I have a stakeholder who's just running ahead. How do I slow them down? And sometimes it's the honest exuberance, and sometimes it's both. A couple things. One is probably our just tried and true favorite of ask why 5 times at a minimum. And so sometimes that can kind of manifest. Sometimes why can sound confrontational, but it's what about what are the unique human needs we think we're addressing? Why do we think the data that we've collected are representative of those? Why do we think that the predictions that might come out of this technology will be useful? How do we plan to measure it? But really pragmatically, usually it's in a meeting that's rushed. There's someone that wants to get to a next step. And your best case scenario is to try to distill down into, okay, what's the quickest way we could hack together a prototype to test some of our assumptions? Like, we know we're building this potentially amazing new thing. There's going to be a ton of work because training really robust machine learning models, and oh, by the way, if there's hardware involved, super long lead time. Let's really, let's hedge here, and let's, frame it from the perspective of we all want to find common ground. So let's actually spend the remainder of this meeting talking about a few things that we'd like to try to get answers on if we were to just hack together something. And that's why, Christian, you probably expand on this from a study design perspective. But the levers to try to pull there from a human-centered design perspective are very similar as they have been before. It's that people have an image in their head of what they believe the right answer could look like. And usually it's a real challenge to try to get those images out of their head and onto a shared canvas. And that challenge is magnified with machine learning because it's actually really problematic if you just run forward and you only have a small set of people who are reviewing the outputs, because chances are you're building for a bigger audience, and that audience will be dynamic and diverse. And they're, the much safer way is to, again, try to find that agreement in the ignorable stuff, or the stuff where there's broader land, and then refine your way to the more nuanced points. Christine, you add anything to that?
Yeah, to build on that, I really like what you said about creating something tangible to test. And, as a researcher, I'm always like, oh, you got to go talk to some people. And so I think when your team has an idea, it's not bad for people to come up with different ideas from different, different sources. But when you are approached with this idea, get to the human needs that that technology might address, and then test that with your users. So we found, it could be quite a while before you even start developing anything. So it could be as simple as, creating a storyboard that represents the concept. But once you have an idea of the technology, what needs you're hoping to address, you can start testing, are these actual human needs? And then is the solution that we're exploring actually one that might address those needs? And there are plenty of ways to do that through research, I think, through creating storyboards and just using a lot of the other tools that you already have in your toolkit to explore whether or not the solution that your team is interested in is a viable one.
I'll even just give one super quick example. When we were starting to do clips, there was a lot of investment up front into like doing the machine learning and having the model kind of figure it out for itself. And Christine and I set up some stuff where I was like, I just got into Premiere and cut together some clips of participant videos, and then did that with some of our expert curators, and we put it together in a way that people could just like scrub through a video and watch their own content. And we had already all this sunk cost about like all these different dimensions of things people are interested in, but we got real clear alignment that like, yes, while there's a bunch that people could potentially be interested in, it's virtually guaranteed that people really wanted to see their kids and their pets. And so that was able to really like distill down this space. We saved ourselves likely, millions of dollars in expending energy, both in terms of the data and the model training, because we just hacked together something that was at least close enough to get signal.
I love that for this first question that your backdrop is sort of a hardware pin board for getting something quickly prototyped.
Totally.
I'm also going to repeat something that Christine said because I think that it's so critical that particularly when addressing the tendency to build for technology's sake, and that is, are these human needs, and is the solution that we are building going to address those needs? It's a very simple question, but oftentimes we don't ask it enough, and we jump into the feature or the application or making sure that we get the data that we need. But that data will depend on the problem you're trying to solve. So always start with the problem. I've got two more questions, and then I'll open it up to, actually, we're very, very close on time. So maybe I'll pause on the questions that are coming from the chat. Is anybody on Live Hangout want to ask anything? If not, I've got the question. Yeah,
so,
go ahead.
Thanks. I think that both of you mentioned several times that you were focusing more, or you should focus more on the value for the user, the actual feature, and less about the technology or the AI, the ML behind it. Are there cases where you think users may be more willing or want to be aware that there's some AI behind it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it really depends on who your audience is and the type of product you're developing. So actually, the backdrop of Josh, and you can kind of see back in the corner maybe, are AIY kits. And so these are a product that I work on that enable people to build their own projects that use machine learning. And so in these cases, the kind of whole value of these kits is that it allows you to build machine learning into your projects. So in that case, we're definitely talking about the technology a lot more than in the case where the Pixel Now Playing feature is just allowing people to see what music is playing around them. So I think it's worth taking time to understand who your audience is. And, if you're catering to a tech-savvy audience who is excited about it, then maybe it is appropriate to talk a lot more about the machine learning behind the scenes.
I would just add one little, I think it's a super good example. And I'd add one additional layer, and this is research that Christine directly contributed to around messaging, which is the way we describe the technology is mostly about helping people build an effective mental model. And so when we talk about AI, we talk about intelligence, that doesn't necessarily build a lot of room for the user. But when we talk about learning, it actually really opens things up, because one of the things that comes along with learning is that mistakes are going to happen as you learn. And so when it makes sense to help set expectations that like it's not always going to get it right, and it's actually kind of a co-creation process in and of itself for the user to interact with these technologies, framing them in terms of learning and kind of not dumbing it down about like calling the technology dumb or bad, or it's really just preparing people. We found had a significant impact on adoption and engagement.
Thank you.
And I do want to be mindful of time. Josh, Christine, do you want to take one more question?
Yeah.
Or do you have to jump off?
No, yeah. One more is good.
Okay. Trying to decide between the two. We've got one from Federico from the video chat, and he was asking about, so the initial phases of training your model should be based on general common sense, that you can't necessarily get user preferences when a user's not interacting with the photos or with the video or with your content yet. But once you start to go into user preferences, what are some of the signals and the data that you should be looking at to train a model for user preferences? And that may be very, very broad. So perhaps we focus specifically on photos and video. But if you have general insights, that might be interesting as well.
Yeah, there's I'll throw one out, Christine, and then you feel free to add on. We really discovered this over and over again at Google, that there was a disconnect in the qualitative assessment of big data when we were training these models. So just like in the olden days with the discovery of telemetry, it was like telemetry wasn't valuable until there were actual qualitative measures that you could overlay on top and see how to see signal in the noise. So for machine learning, what this means is, yes, you have to train your model on a lot of data, and yes, you need to start honing in on individual features, but the standard measures of like engagement, clicks, time on task, those actually start to fall short because you overfit, and so one of my favorite examples here is Smart Reply. Smart Reply feature that is in Inbox, it's in a number of different areas, or Gmail, and allows you to opt in to grabbing this little snippet that's like been pre-prepared for you, snippet of text. And when it was first introduced, they were really measuring its performance based on number of clicks, and it sort of learned that the thing people just really want to say all the time is "I love you," because it was the most guaranteed, most high likelihood that people were going to click on it of all the things. People don't actually want to say "I love you" all the time. And so not only were people not really happy with the feature because it was recommending kind of dumb suggestions, but also it was learning the wrong thing. And what that team learned to pivot on is customer satisfaction, and over a longer period of time. So instead of a really short-term engagement loop, it's a more of a longitudinal success criteria. And what you open yourself up to is, yeah, we're going to train a bunch of these models, but we're going to rally them all up to customer satisfaction. And when customer satisfaction and overarching reuse and the drop off in in people, or there's less and less drop off in people, you find the signals. And so what they discovered is actually just the presence of Smart Reply was super valuable, because it helped people kind of like construct their own thoughts and then type their own custom message. So even if it only gets clicked on a few times, overall its appearance and its the anchoring effect that it provides is actually a significant increase to customer satisfaction. We did the same thing with clips. We tried to figure out customer satisfaction and what does that let us actually optimize for. And so there's a network of 24 different models that power Google Clips. But when we optimize all of them against really the user, quality improved dramatically.
I think That is a really powerful segue because that ties in from our Joy of Missing Out talk, which we had 2 weeks ago, talking about shifting the paradigm from user engagement to user value and really redefining what success looks like and how you measure it. And I want to thank both Josh and Christine one more time so much for fitting this in. I know that you both have extremely busy schedules, but the information is extremely valuable. And if there's any other questions that anyone else has from the GDE program or from the assistant community program, just reach out to myself or Agnes, and we'll do our best to get those questions answered. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Really great.